welcome to American Catholic History. If you like our podcast, be sure to follow us, give us a 5-star rating, and a great review wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please become a supporter at americancatholichistory.org/support. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Today we're talking about Father Leo Heinrichs, a Franciscan from Germany who was shot dead at the communion rail in Denver, Colorado. Now, this is such a sensational story that it's surprising his name isn't more well known among American Catholics.
You're not kidding. But this is why we do this podcast.
That's right. It's like you said so many times, American Catholics have a remarkable history of all of our own, and we do not need to cross an ocean to visit the grave of a martyr or of an incredibly holy priest.
Nope. We have them all across this country, coast to coast, and Father Leo is a double example. He left an example of humble, Christ-like service and devotion, and he also suffered martyrdom. He would have been an example for all of us without the dramatic circumstances of his death.
Well, so let's tell everyone about Father Leo and where he came from.
Right. So Father Leo Heinrichs was born Joseph Heinrichs in Oesterreich, Rhineland, Germany, on the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, August 15th, 1867. In his teens, Joseph sought to enter the Franciscan Order of Friars Minor in Fulda, Germany, but the anti-Catholic Kulturkampf pushed by the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was making life difficult for Catholics and especially religious orders.
Right. The Kulturkampf figures into a number of these stories about German Catholics coming to the United States. Kulturkampf translates into English as culture struggle, and Bismarck really saw it as that. His goal was a unified German state under Prussian dominance, and he saw the Catholic Church as the chief obstacle to that goal. So, in 1871, he pushed a number of anti-Catholic laws, which resulted in many bishops being imprisoned and lots of priests sent into exile. Religious orders were also persecuted.
First, he expelled the Jesuits, then eventually all religious orders had to go. All who sought to enter religious studies had to study for 3 years at a secular German university before they would be permitted to enter religious studies.
Right. And ultimately, Bismarck was successful in unifying Germany, and his policies did really make life difficult for Catholics. But the Kulturkampf failed to bring Catholics into line. Polish, Prussian, and other German Catholics actually became more unified and opposed to his rule. He abandoned the Kulturkampf, but not before communities like the Franciscans of Fulda fled.
They crossed the ocean and went first to New York State, where some German-speaking Capuchins had previously established a monastery and welcomed their Franciscan confreres. Eventually, the bishop of the new diocese of Ogdensburg, New York, gave the Franciscans a parish. A few years later, Bishop Michael Corrigan of Newark, New Jersey, invited a group of them to establish a monastery and parish in Paterson.
And that monastery and parish, St. Bonaventure, is where Joseph Heinrichs was sent to further his Franciscan formation and to study to become a priest.
He made simple vows as a Franciscan on the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, December 8, 1887, and was given the name Leo. 3 years later, he made his final vows, also on the Immaculate Conception, December 8, 1890. And then, the following year, he was ordained a priest on the Feast of Saints Anne and Joachim, July 26, 1891, which happens to be my birthday.
Yeah, not July 26, 1891,
no, I'm not
to be
that
clear.
I'd have a remarkably strong voice for that.
So, Joseph was born on the Feast of the Assumption, twice took vows on the Immaculate Conception, and was ordained on the Feast of Mary's Parents. I'm noticing a Marian theme in his life.
You noticed that as well?
Yeah.
Well, stay tuned. It lasts right up until the end.
Now, Father Leo Heinrichs, OFM, began his priestly ministry in northern New Jersey. He was made master of novices for the friary, he served as a pastor, he ministered to the sick during the smallpox epidemic, and he was generally a well-loved priest. This lasted for a long time, 16 years, until 1907, when Father Leo was sent west to become pastor at the parish that the Franciscans ran in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, and that's quite a jump across the country, but it happened more or less the same way the Franciscans ended up in Paterson. The Bishop of Denver, Joseph Machabouf, had a large group of German-speaking Catholics. He established the parish of St. Elizabeth of Hungary for these German immigrants in 1878, and 9 years later, in 1887, he asked the Franciscans of St. Bonaventure in Paterson to send some German-speaking friars to help. They were happy to oblige. So, in September 1907, 40-year-old Father Leo Heinrichs arrived in Denver. Just 5 months later, this well-loved friar, this refugee from the persecution of Bismarck's Kulturkampf, would become a martyr.
Right, but you're jumping ahead just a little bit.
Only 5 months.
Yeah, well, they're an important 5 months.
Okay, fine. So you start the next part of the story.
Okay. Well, one part of the rest of the story is that this means Father Leo was working in Denver at the same time as one of my favorites, servant of God, Julia Greeley. By the time Father Leo arrived, Greeley had been spreading the love of God throughout Denver for 27 years.
Yes, Julia Greeley is just one of the most remarkable people we've talked about. God is never doing just one thing at a time, and in Denver, he was doing at least 2 amazing things in that 1907-1908 era.
Now, there's no evidence that Father Leo and Julia Greeley ever met, but they were certainly kindred spirits in their work for the poor. Father Leo arrived in September and quickly became popular among his flock, especially those in need. Every morning, he would feed everyone who came to the friary gate and offer kind words of encouragement and a blessing.
So, more or less what he was doing back in Paterson, seeing needs and filling them, tending to the spiritual and temporal needs of the people.
Right. And at some point after arriving in Denver, he received permission from his superiors to return to Germany. He had not seen his family in more than 20 years, so he was really eager to make the trip.
But he couldn't leave immediately because there were 70 children in the First Communion class, and he wanted to be there for them in the spring. So he decided to put off the trip home until the summer of 1908, so he would be around for that happy occasion.
In mid-February 1908, he spoke at a meeting of the Ladies' Sodality, and in the course of his remarks, he said something very poignant. He said, "If I had my choice of a place where I would die, I would choose to die at the feet of the Blessed Virgin." Well, he didn't have long to wait to get his choice.
No. The following weekend, he had the 8 a.m. Sunday Mass. He typically offered that Mass with another priest offering the 6 a.m. Mass. The 6 a.m. Mass was offered especially for working men who had to get to work. But that Sunday, Father Heinrichs had a meeting in the morning, so he asked Father Wohlstand Werkman to swap Mass times with him, so that he would have the 6 and Father Werkman would have the 8. Father Werkman accepted the swap. So on that Sunday, February 23rd, Father Leo Heinrichs stepped out of the sacristy to offer the 6 a.m. Mass.
Now, sitting in the third row that morning was a newcomer to the parish, Giuseppe Alia. Alia was an Italian anarchist who had only recently come through Ellis Island. Alia hated the Catholic Church, and especially priests. He blamed priests for problems in his life, including the breakup of his family.
So, Alia decided that morning that he was going to murder 4 priests. I suppose. He had brought with him a revolver, and the night before he sharpened the bullets that he had put into it to a point. Before Mass, Alia positioned himself right in front of the pulpit because he intended to shoot the priest during the sermon.
However, since the Mass was for working men and Father Leo wanted to keep it short, he did not go to the pulpit to deliver his sermon. Instead, as was an option at the time, after proclaiming the gospel, he just turned and made a few remarks from the footpace or the top step of the altar, and then continued with Mass. So, Alia was forced to wait for communion.
Which he did. When communion came, he approached the rail and knelt between 2 older women. When Father Leo gave him communion, he spat it out in his hand and flung it back at Father Leo. Then he pulled out his pistol and shot Father Leo once in the chest before whirling and running toward the main door, shrieking like a demon. The altar boy had just enough time to shout, "Look out, Father!" before the shot was fired. Father Leo mortally wounded, exclaimed, my God, before he fell. With strength failing, he placed the ciborium on the lower step of the side altar and managed to replace 2 hosts in it before he died. He died smiling and pointing to the remaining hosts that had spilled onto the floor.
And where he died, of course, was at the foot of the side altar dedicated to Mary, just as he had desired.
Yes, like I said, Mary had a special place for him.
After firing the shot, Giuseppe Alia didn't get far. It was, after all, the working man's mass, so there were a few able-bodied men there that morning. One man tripped him as he bolted down the aisle, and an off-duty police officer in the congregation tackled him at the door. With the help of a few other men, they subdued Alia. He was arrested and taken to the city jail.
Before long, the shocking news spread, and many men in town began grumbling about lynching the murderer. Fearing mob justice, the authorities moved Alia to the county jail, which was a more fortified building, and they eventually slipped him out of town to Colorado Springs to await trial.
While in jail, Alia spouted his anti-Catholic venom. He told the authorities, I just went over there because I have a grudge against all priests. They are all against the working man. I am an anarchist, and I am proud of it. I shot him, and my only regret is that I could not shoot a whole bunch of priests in the church.
Father Verkman, who, remember, was supposed to offer the 6 a.m., visited Alia in jail to try to minister to him. Alia spat and swore at him. Father Verkman and the Franciscans tried more than once to visit with Alia to try to turn his conscience. He was having none of it. Eventually, they had to give up.
Alia was convicted of murder and hanged, though the Franciscans pleaded for him to be spared. His final words were, death to the priests.
The coroner ruled that Father Leo's death was due to a single bullet wound through the left ventricle of the heart. But that wasn't all that the autopsy revealed. Before the coroner cut into Father Leo's body, he found something that none of Father Leo's brother friars knew about. Father Leo had worn leather straps around his upper arms and his waist. These straps had pointed iron hooks on the inside of them, which left the skin raw and calloused in places, but there was no sign of infection. None knew of this mortification that Father Leo practiced.
Father Leo's funeral was attended by the mayor of Denver and the governor of Colorado. It was one of the largest Denver had ever seen.
Which was remarkable when you consider that he had fled religious persecution in Germany and traveled thousands of miles only to be martyred by an Italian anarchist 5 months after arriving in Denver.
I mean, it's really incredible.
Yeah.
Father Workman, reflecting on his brush with death, told the Denver Post, I would have been killed and he would be alive now. There is one way to solve the affair that I could see, and that is that God chose the better man.
Father Leo's senior assistant pastor at St. Elizabeth, Father Eusebius Schlingmann, wrote to Father Leo, his was a nature of that fine make, which we see only in God's own men. Gentle and affable to all, he knew how to be strong and forceful for good. Here in the friary we have lost a gentle master.
Father Leo's body was eventually transferred back to the Franciscan Mother House in Paterson, New Jersey. When the order's graves were moved in 1911, Father Leo's body was found to be in remarkably good condition. His casket and habit were badly decayed, and the other friars who had died after him showed the expected deterioration, but his head and face were very well preserved.
That same year, a parish in what is now Elmwood Park, New Jersey, was dedicated to St. Leo the Great, a move made to honor Father Leo Heinrichs.
Father Leo is listed among American martyrs and is regarded as the Proto-Martyr of Colorado. His cause for canonization opened in 1926, but it stalled in 1940. But that hasn't stopped people from visiting his grave and praying for his intercession. So who knows, maybe one day that parish in Elmwood Park will be dedicated not to the great 5th century pope, but rather to the German Franciscan immigrant who died a martyr at Mary's feet in early 20th century Denver, Colorado. This has been American Catholic History. If you enjoy American Catholic History, please become a supporter. We've got great perks for supporters. Get information on how to become a supporter and the perks at americancatholichistory.org/support.
Also on our website, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about Father Leo Heinrichs, see about our pilgrimages, and find other great stories from American Catholic history.
We also love the great reviews our listeners leave. Those and the 5-star ratings help others find us. You can also email us feedback, questions, tips for episode topics, or other comments at feedback@americancatholichistory.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/American Catholic History, on Instagram at ACH_podcast, and follow us on Twitter at ACH1513. I'm Noelle Huster-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Thank you once again for joining us on American Catholic History, made possible by listeners like you.